Hey everybody, I'm Michelle and I'm on staff here at City Church. I'm joined today by Chris and Catherine Marlin, and we are looking at one of our four values. Our four values at City Church OTR are family, mission, presence, and formation. So right now we are talking about formation. And it's interesting because in our episode we did about presence, we talked about the idea that like being with God can change things in an instant.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how powerful his presence is. That's how powerful he is. That like it can change in an instant. So we have this dynamic of like presence, but then also formation, which is not generally instant. So Chris, tell us a little more, like what does it mean when we talk about the idea of formation at City Church?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tension. We talk a lot about tension here, holding things in tension. Mm-hmm. It seems like that's what Jesus did. But I often think about like the Great Commission. So what we talk about all the time in churches. And Jesus says that they're supposed to go out and teach to obey all that I've commanded. And so formation feels like, oh, my life is actually supposed to change over time. It's not teach them to memorize all that I said, but there's actual life change. So I think the Great Commission is actually a great window into Jesus saying, being formed into my image actually matters. And so we've chosen, because also in an instant, Jesus healed people or got a word of knowledge. Like he was all about the presence of God. And Jesus held in tension, like, oh, there's a slow process to becoming like me. And so when we say formation, we're like, oh no, we want both of those things. There's a slowness to us becoming more like Jesus.
Yeah, and one of the ways that we're living this out is Bible reading plan. So Bible reading plan in a year. Super slow, takes a whole year.
Yeah.
But we think like as we were reading scripture, we are being more formed into God's character, into his image, and that it's worthwhile effort to spend 15 minutes a day or whatever to read scripture and align our hearts with that. It's slow work, but it's worthwhile work.
Yeah. Well, even there is a slowness to certain like programs like Bible reading plan that we're doing. I've been surprised how well like being slow with people has gone. And now that we're a few years in, like we've had the scope to see lives change. I mean, my life has changed. All of our lives have changed. But I like think a lot about Sergey, who, I don't know if you remember, we met him at a happy hour. And he didn't come to church, didn't come to a house group. He came to a happy hour, met him there, and it was just normal. Like we started talking. And then I think he came to our house group, and then a few months later, he came to a Sunday service, and then he took me up on like, yeah, I'll read the Bible. Like we would just show up to church early and read the Bible Sunday mornings. And after a few months, I mean, this is like a year in, I'm like, bro, I think you believe this stuff. And I remember, I love him. He's like, yeah, I do. Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that's what happened. So, and then we baptize him. And Sergey's like a leader in our church, like playing in our band, leading a house group. Like his life has now drastically changed, but it wasn't that he showed up at a happy hour and now he's a house group leader. Like there was a slowness in the way that our church said like, okay, we want to let this guy be formed into the image of Jesus at the pace that Jesus has for him, which I think is really unique.
Yeah. And a really, like, specifically with his story, very healthy way. Like, you don't want someone to jump from, like, oh, happy hour to leading the church necessarily.
Right.
Like,
It's true.
Having a path of, like, development and growth and change so that people are equipped to be able to step into the roles that God calls them to is so important. And that doesn't, again, God can move in an instant, but it also most of the time doesn't happen overnight for someone to make that that shift. And for someone like Sergey, for us, like we're all being formed into something. Like we're all becoming somebody. It's just a question of like, what actually is it that we're letting form us?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And one of our friends says, you'll never regret a single decision that you make to become more like Jesus. Yeah. And we so believe that's true.
Yeah.
We think it's better, like we talked about family in our other podcast. It's better in the context of family. If we're trying to do this formation work on our own, it's super lonely. Like you're going to burn out. You're not going to follow through. But when you're doing this hard work in the context of family, of people supporting you, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. I don't think, and Dallas Willard has this great quote about God not being opposed to our effort. Like he's of course opposed to us trying to work our way to him. Yeah. But I think formation in a grace-filled community reminds us, oh, there's work for me to do too. with God. I'm working with God. I'm not working to God. Yeah. And so, in a lot of what we want to talk about, it's like, okay, how do we put our hands to the plow together and like actually do the work, the slow work of becoming more like Jesus? And so, given that we're here, like we're not going anywhere, we don't think this church is going anywhere, like we're in it for the long haul, both for Cincinnati and the world. And so, given that time's not really a constraint, what could Jesus do with our time and our effort and our years? And I remember when we were talking about family, I did the like illustration of when you go to a restaurant, like you picture what's happening here is I'm at a business and I'm paying them to solve my problems. Yeah. My problem being I don't want to cook, I don't want to clean, I really don't want to cook, I don't want to shop, I hate grocery stores. That's right. And all of that is like, but that's how you interact with a business. You pay them to solve your problem versus when you go over to a family member's house or a friend's house. Or if you came over, Michelle, and we said like, hey, I'll wash the dishes and you dry. I doubt you would be offended by that because that feels like family. Like, of course you would dry the dishes versus at the restaurant that you're paying $50 for a meal. You're like, here, I'll dry the dishes for $50. Yeah. And so I think if we, in the context of mission or presence or formation, all of these, we have to look at it like it's family. Yeah. And so the phrase we've kind of thrown around is like, grab a towel. Like, we're not afraid to dry the dishes. You don't come to church because it's a business where like the pastor or the band solves my problems, makes me more like Jesus. Yeah. I think formation more than any of these shows us like, oh, there's a hand that I have in this, or there's effort that I have to put to this, but I'm doing it with other people and I'm doing it with Jesus. And I think that makes the difference. So yeah, we're not opposed to grabbing a towel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you all for joining us. If you haven't checked them out, we have 3 other episodes about our other 3 values, but we hope you'll check those out. And thanks again.